Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Hello, this is Story by Story.
Sharing the human experience.
And I'm Joe Doolittle.
I'm Kate Dudding.
And we're storytellers. And today we're not really storytellers, we're kind of hosts of a wonderful hour of stories and background on storytelling right here in our hometown, upstate New York. I suppose that's not a town, is it? But it's
Area.
It's where we live.
Capital region.
It's where we live. And we've had just such a wonderful month of storytelling coming on after Christmas. And you know, if you were here with us last month, you know we had Joe and Jesse Bruchak on, and their Story Sunday at the Glenn Sanders was just one of the finest times we've had of storytelling.
And a number of people went out saying, they should come back.
They should.
And I was going, we've had them before and they will come back, but not every year. We need to spread it around a bit.
And just as a reference, you should stay tuned about the outdoor education center that the Bruchaks run up in Greenfield Center, just out of Saratoga, and Dakina, because they have a whole summer series, one night every other week, I think, of storytelling, and they have a full program. So I was just so taken by that night. That was just a great night.
And you can see them, those stories that they told last month are on our YouTube channel. You can go to storycircle@proctors.org and click on the YouTube button, and then we have almost 90 stories now that you can access.
And 90 stories. Boy, that storyteller must have gotten a sore throat before he figured.
No, it's over 20 storytellers.
Oh, 20 stories. So there are different people on there besides Joe and Jesse. Are you and I on there? Oh,
yes,
okay.
we are, Joe.
Okay. I knew that. I was
That's
just trying
why I'm laughing. I was trying. Which one of us is the dummy here? Am I the dummy or is he the dummy?
I'm Gracie today, Kate.
Okay.
Well, no, but storytelling is alive and well in the Capital District, and I think that's the point we're trying to make.
And the other program that I thought was so special was at Word Plays at Proctor's. We had a program titled Staying Alive.
Yeah.
8 different storytellers, including our guest, whom you'll meet shortly. And the stories, there were some lighthearted ones, though one of the sort of lighthearted ones involved a time when, and it's an absolutely true story, when a parachute did not open. And so we always knew she survived, but
we had never heard the story. And if I didn't know her better, I would say that she was really stretching the truth, but it is actually something that happened to her.
And so we had that, and we had Aditya Agashe, who is one of the only 8 young storytellers who has been invited to go to Utah for the Timpanogos Winter Storytelling Conference, and one of 8 across the country.
Yeah.
So he told a very fine story. Our guest, Eliud, shared a very personal part of his life. We had another folk tale. It was just a wonderful, heartfelt afternoon of stories.
And you know, it's interesting that when Kate and I are talking like this, you say, well, look, you know, Kate and Joe are going to talk it up because it's what they do. But actually, we have a listserv as part of our Story Circle Guild. And the chatter among the tellers and the listeners on that listserv after Sunday's performance was the most genuinely refreshing comments about excellence, emotionally being involved, and you know, for a group of people who like to talk, we aren't that expressive about our own performances in a way, and we were on that, and I was quite taken by it. So we're going to come to some other continuing events at Proctor's and at the Glenn Sanders Mansion, and other plans that we're trying to hatch for the summer. But we have a guest who's kind of who's extraordinary in many ways, and you'll discover that as you meet him. Do you want to introduce our guest?
Yes. Seemingly out of nowhere, Eliud Nieves appeared at one of our Story Circle meetings, our guild meetings, and poof, a fabulous new storyteller arrived maybe a year ago, more or less. I think that was about it. And he comes every time. He comes from, of course, his home, which is beyond Ithaca. So we are very pleased that he is willing to travel so far to join us in our endeavors. Eliud Nieves.
Welcome, welcome. And Eliud, beyond Ithaca, do you really live in Pennsylvania? Is that what you're trying to say? No.
Well, almost. Actually,
Almost.
I'm 30 minutes from Pennsylvania.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
So, yeah, so I'm in between Pennsylvania and Ithaca.
Someplace. Well, and we are pleased to have him. He's been a real pleasure and a joy because he's brought a whole different way of telling stories. It's not that every storyteller is different, but every storyteller is different.
Absolutely.
And Eliud, you didn't grow up, beyond Ithaca, did you? You grew up someplace else.
I did. I was actually born in Puerto Rico.
Oh, really?
Yes.
That's an island, right?
It's an island, and but I was
South of here.
South of here.
but I was raised in New York City.
Okay. So that you grew up and you went to school in the city.
Yes.
And then, before you were a storyteller, you were a teacher, right?
I was a teacher for 33 years.
33 years. You don't look that old, guy. I just guess. And did you have a favorite thing that you taught, or
Well, I've taught several things, but probably my favorite was teaching art and drama with elementary school students.
Earlier, as we were talking about this, Eliud has taught several different things, and in listening to it, you could be like the utility infield player for teachers, because you could do this and do
Right,
that.
right.
Want some bilingual teaching? Okay, Eliud, go.
That's right.
And it just, so that's kind of, and so that you grew up and did you teach mostly in New York too?
Well, I worked as a teacher in the Bronx for 15 years, and from there I went to Florida, and I spent 19 years in Florida
Wow.
teaching.
So you've been around. That's fun. That's fun.
And is it through your teaching that you got into storytelling, or was that another adventure?
Well, I always loved stories because my mother was a storyteller of sorts for the family, and she would put me to sleep telling me stories. And although she had like maybe a grade school education, she was an avid reader, read stories, and she would put me to sleep with a story every night. And when she didn't have one she had read, she would make one up. So
So
There you
it
go.
was always part of your life.
right, and I always incorporated storytelling in teaching.
Right.
When I worked in the Bronx, actually, I did art for a while, and it was art on a cart. There was no art room. So I traveled from room to room. The teachers in the classrooms didn't want me to do much because it was a mess, so
Yeah.
I had to kind of improvise. So a lot of times I told a story, and I had the children illustrate. And that was quick and easy, and
Very interesting. I think a little bit about, I haven't really taught it at the grade school level like that, but I have two granddaughters, and my wife is really good at crafts. So when they come over, they do some little project, and there's always this patter back and forth about what's going on, and it's a story. And I'm so klutzy I don't do the crafts, but I do
Me too.
occasionally chime into the stories. But it's good. That's good. So when your mother was putting you to sleep, and I just want you to know that as storytellers, we like to put children to sleep, but most audiences would rather if you stayed awake. I just wanted to put that out
yes, right.
But if you need to sleep, we understand
Yeah,
that too.
that's true. We've never been really vitriolic about it. But somewhere along the timeline, you must have discovered that you were a storyteller too.
Right, well actually, when I started teaching, my first job was teaching ESOL, English as a second language. So I wanted to, there was teaching certain things of the English language, so I thought the best way to do that was through story. So actually I wrote a story, and to illustrate some of my some of the language, and I used that with children. So that's when I kind of started working with stories.
Fun.
So,
So you kind of channeled your mother in the classroom.
yes.
We all do in a way, I suppose, but I hadn't heard it come out quite that way before.
I think Janine Laverty, who is, I don't know that you've met her yet, but
No.
she's a storyteller from Saratoga Springs. She started as an English as a second
Language.
as a second
Second
language.
language.
Yes. Second language. Okay. And she would try to get folk tales from the backgrounds of the children in her class. And I think that's how she fell in love with folk tales.
Very good. Well, you know, we have a guest storyteller with us today, Kate, and maybe we ought to ask him to tell a story.
Oh, you're back in your dummy mode again.
No, I'm not. I just decided that I was so impressed lately with what Joe Biden has done on this gun, control issue, that I'm just trying to channel the vice president. I think that would be. I mean, we're about the same age. No, huh? I'll stop.
Whatever.
I'll stop. But I would like to hear a story,
Oh, yes, very much so.
and we'd love to, and then we'll kind of debrief the story,
Right.
and after you're finished.
Yes.
But we've heard you tell, and we want.
And I can remember 3 very different kinds of stories that you've told. And so I wonder what you're going to pull out of your hat, metaphorically, today.
Metaphorically. Okay, well, the story I'm going to tell is called The Selfish King. And it starts like this. Once, a giant castle towered above all the trees that surrounded it. Its shiny walls glimmered in the sunlight. The selfish king who inhabited the castle stood by a window, motionless, staring out into the deep green forest. He possessed all the wealth and power any ruler could ever hope for. But the one thing that he coveted the most, he could not get his greedy hands on. That one thing was the most beautiful bird that the world had ever known. This bird was a dove. It was the color of new fallen snow with delicate shades of moonlight. Its soft black eyes were like rare pearls found in the deepest ocean. The cry that emanated from its mouth was not mournful, but it was soothing and inspiring. It sang of hopes and possibilities. The people of the kingdom loved this bird who lived atop an olive tree in the middle of the forest. Oftentimes they would gather at the foot of the giant tree to listen to the beautiful songs. Parents would hold their children and they listened quietly, reverently. Old people would weep without knowing why. All they knew was that the sight and the sound of this unique creature made them glad they were alive. The king walked away from the window and he slammed his fist on a table and he vowed right then and there that he would own the one thing he did not possess. So then he called his top generals and he promised glory and fame to the one who could bring the bird to the castle. Now the generals looked at each other in disbelief because they knew how much the people loved this beautiful creature. But orders were orders and they had to be followed. So the generals sent out the armies with promises of promotions and medals, and the soldiers went out like a devastating wildfire, destroying everything in their paths. They did not stop until they came to the giant olive tree. Then, methodically, they began to chop it down. Little by little, the mighty tree began to lean and lean and lean until it came crashing down to the forest floor. All the nearby creatures had to flee for their lives. Then the soldiers searched the mangled branches until they came across the stunned dove. One of them picked it up. It gave no resistance. Its eyes were closed and its tiny heart beat weakly and sadly. That soldier ran back to the castle and he gave the king his trophy. Oh, the king was elated, and immediately he placed a gold star on the soldier's chest. He took the dove and he tossed it into a wrought iron cage, locked the cage door, and walked out of the room. Now, the next day, the king returned, and this time the dove was more alert. Its eyes were open, but They were very sad. The king gave the dove some seeds, placed some water in the cage, and sat back in a fancy chair and demanded a song. None came. No matter how much that king screeched and bellowed and hollered, the dove made no sound. That selfish king stormed out of the room. The next day he returned. The results were the same. The dove made no sound. Every day he would return, always the same. Now one day, the selfish king came back to where the bird was, and he noticed something strange. The beautiful white color had disappeared. The dove had turned an ashen, dull gray color, and those once beautiful eyes had taken that cold, dull, lackluster black of the wrought iron cage. The king didn't understand what was happening. The dove looked as if it were dying. Then the king happened to look out the castle window, and he noticed the people of the kingdom were walking around as if in a trance. They were acting peculiar. He ran outside and he wanted to know what was happening. They wouldn't talk to him. They just continued walking. And he noticed that their faces had the same color as the dove, a dull, grayish color. Their eyes were the color of the wrought iron cage. What was happening? He didn't understand, and he noticed a child, perhaps a beggar, leaning against a storefront, and he ran to him, and he demanded, the child tell him what was happening. The child looked up with that colorless face, those eyes that resembled the wrought iron cage, and the child spoke weakly and said, "Please, let it go. Release it so we may all live." And then the king looked at the store window, and to his horror, he saw that he was just like everybody else. The color had left his face, and his eyes were that cold, dull black of the wrought iron cage. The king ran back to the palace. He went to the room where the cage was, and he opened the cage, and the dove stood there like a statue. But then it began to move slowly. It left the cage, and it lifted its wings as if to fly, but it fell weakly to the floor. The king picked it up gently, and he placed the dove on the sill of an open window. And as soon as the streaks of sunlight hit that bird, its color came back. It was revived. Those eyes began to sparkle and dance in the sunlight. And the dove looked back at the king, whose face was now streaked with tears. And he lifted his wings and took off. And with that, he let out the most beautiful song that king had ever heard. And he disappeared into a patchwork of clouds. Now, in that kingdom, people's hearts were filled with joy and hope, including the king's. And it is said that the king demolished his big castle, and in this place, he planted an olive grove where the dove and all his descendants sing to the people to this day, filling their hearts with peace and hope. That's my story.
Wow. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Where did the story come from?
I wrote that story.
Oh,
You did. You did.
I did.
Well, that's it was, you know, there's a lot going on in that story. And, because I often think that there's at least two dimensions. You know, there's what you're telling, and then what the listener is kind of hearing and beginning to relate in his own life. You know, and it was so that happens. You know, after about a minute of the story, you begin to go into the like bimodal processing of the voices and the messages you're getting, and that worked real well because it was pretty generative for me. And I thought it was probably one of the turning points. It's just artful. You know, when the king looked in the window of the storefront and realized that he had also suffered by his actions, that by tearing out the dove, he was diminished.
There's that same point as in King Midas when he turned his daughter to gold and realized the full horror of his golden wish.
Right.
His or in this case his greedy desire.
Right.
Yeah, and it was just really good. Now, there's some roots in the story in I suppose in Midas and maybe other places.
I didn't think of Midas until just that
But
moment.
it's also universal in its message it sends to listeners, particularly young listeners, about what it means to be a king. You know, that the king cried in the end. That in order to become a king in his own right, he had to both suffer and be humbled and less arrogant and a servant. So it's just that's a nice message part of it, in addition to the rekindling beauty by. And the other parallel I was thinking of is it's kind of like sometimes you'll love things too much. You know, your greed or your whatever, but you love the bird so much that you think it's going to be okay if you take it into your own presence and don't let it blossom in the world. So that was going on too. I'm getting very philosophical. Does Joe Biden get philosophical?
I
like
don't
this?
know. Let's leave Joe alone. Let's leave that Joe alone. Did you write this for a particular occasion, or?
Well, I was just thinking one day how sometimes I was thinking of world leaders and rulers, and sometimes they take actions to maybe satisfy their own greed, their own desires, or without giving it a lot of thought to how it affects others. And eventually, like Joe said, it affects them as well.
Yeah.
Power corrupts.
Ultimate power corrupts, absolutely. Yeah. I can't remember who said that. It wasn't Joe Biden.
No.
No. Now, when you say you wrote the story, do you tell stories? Do you write as well in terms of stories or novels? I mean, you must have.
Yeah, I've written quite a number of stories, mostly for children. Never gotten anything published, not that I've tried, but sometimes I also like to tell some of the stories that I've written. I've also written plays for children that I've produced with some of my elementary school students, you know, so.
So so that this method of art on a cart, where you had to do the story in Kids Illustrated, has stayed with you.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you know, when you think about it,
improvising, sure.
It's a great method.
Yeah.
It's a great method.
Yeah.
I'm in awe. I don't know that I have that kind of discipline to lay things out. And one of the nice things about telling a story is that you're just telling a story. You don't have to dot all the I's and do all that other stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Get tongue-tied sometimes.
Neato. Now, how about poetry? You have the voice of a poet in you.
I've written poetry.
Okay, good.
I have written, not that I really don't know the mechanics of poetry, but sometimes I just write, you know, some feelings that I have. So I have a collection of those, but you know.
Poetry has a way of bubbling up.
Yeah. I mean,
In some ponds.
In some ponds, okay.
You know, I was giving a presentation for a Toastmasters group, and one of the questions at the end was, well, do you ever write original stories? And I go, absolutely original?
Absolutely.
Fiction, you mean? And I said, no, I don't do that. And poetry is, no. Not from this well.
Not
but you have a big, broad well.
Big broad.
Because the stories that that stand out for me, telling was a a Brer Rabbit story, or a variation of, I can't remember whether it's Brer Rabbit or what a variation.
Sure, yes.
The Telltale Heart, and then at Staying Alive you told Pieces of My Life, which were that.
Yeah.
So that was a personal story, and then we have these fictional, though poetry is probably not called fiction, but but to me it's coming out of your head as opposed to, my stories are putting together facts about people and making it into a story, and hopefully subtly slipping in my take about these people.
Absolutely.
That, which is totally different than
Yeah. It is.
starting with, well, I'd like to teach children the way a ruler should be.
Right.
Maybe something like that was your starting point, and going from there. Have we missed any other creative outlets you have artistically?
Well, actually,
You're pretty good. I sniffed that one out.
I do. Like I said, I'm a jack of many trades. So I do a little art. I paint, and I paint. I draw. Actually, I have some work at a gallery down in Owego, New York, Black Cat Gallery. So I have some painting, some sculpture. I'm doing sculpture as well. So I kind of branch out. I kind of dabble in different things. You know.
I'm getting tired just thinking about it. I mean, you know.
I'm.
That's interesting. So, and that all started when you were in your teens or younger, when you started to be creative artistically with art?
Yeah, as a kid, I always did some kind of artwork, you know, and.
Yeah.
But one thing about me, I've always been very shy. So as far as being a storyteller, I was always very comfortable with children. As far as telling for adults, that's something that I'm trying to phase into.
Well, you're doing a really good job on that one.
I would never have guessed that was an issue with you. But I know it's a different thing, especially if you're there as a teacher. You've got your role established and all that.
Right.
But to me, public speaking was like the last thing in the world I ever wanted to do. But when I fell in love with storytelling, I found stories I just had to share. And so I got over it. I did it often enough so that I learned one very special trick from Betty McCanty. If you forget a piece of your story, and I don't know that you need this at all, but if you forget a piece of a story that you're telling and you get to the part where, they need to know the mother's blind, otherwise it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
What she says is, what you need to remember now is that the mother is blind.
Aha.
Now, I'm not quite as gutsy at her.
No, I've actually heard her do that.
Yeah, I'm only 62. She'll be 90 this spring.
Right.
So maybe when I'm a little older, I'll pull that off. I say, what you need to know now is that the mother is blind. And so I no longer panic when I get to I forgot that that was number 3, and but so experience helps in telling to anyone.
Yeah, and when that happens to me, I usually go.
No, because to me, I have done that, but I try. That kind of puts a break in the story.
Yeah, it does.
And where the audience starts caring about you or trying to make you feel better, and that's. I've had teachers say that's really not the best thing.
I
breaking down and sobbing. You probably haven't spent enough time with the story to remove yourself a little bit from it. Storytelling is not supposed to be
although
group therapy, and where
just to clarify this sense of conversation, we're talking about you and Betty. We're not talking about Eliud.
Oh no.
Because he was right on.
Right.
He hit all the marks, at least as far as.
Oh yes. This was just in general to our listeners out there, in case you have opportunities to be a public speaker. Keep that. What you must know now is it's a really good tool in your public speaking toolbox. Yeah.
Well, we're going to just take a little break. break, and then we're going to come back to Eliud and another story. And
We're just about halfway through the show, so.
there we go. We've reached another milestone, halfway through a show. Kate, what's happening in story telling here in the Capitol District?
Okay, well, our show gets broadcast at different times in different areas. So in case, well, this is our February show, you might be seeing it at the end of January. So just in case, I thought I'd repeat the slide we had from last month on stories of coincidence, wonder, and shared joy at our storytelling dinner series at the Glenn Sanders Mansion. It will be Sunday, January 27th at 5 p.m. It'll be the, I think, 103rd storytelling dinner. And Joe Doolittle is one of the tellers with his
Right.
two good buddies, Kent Bushman and Harlan Ratmeyer.
And it's a fundraiser for the Roots and Wisdom program, which puts kids from the city into the gardening profession or avocation. And it's a great program, and we need to renovate the greenhouses in Central Park so we can use them for that program. So this is a fundraiser for that, and we've got a little flair, if you will, a garnish of gardening in our stories. We have a story of a rototiller coming. We have a story of an urban or a suburban harvester of everything, including maple syrup from the suburbs trees and the hops that he grew to make his own beer. That's Kent. And I'm going to talk about strawberries. And as another part of the fundraising, come June, we're going to have a strawberry festival along with Upper Union Street in Central Park, and the garden is another one. So this is going to be a great program, and we encourage anybody who's really interested in gardening and Roots and Wisdom. It's part of Cornell's extension program.
Cooperative extension.
So it's the Master Gardener people too. So it's a goodly company, and we're going to have fun on the 27th, and we hope to see some folks there.
Right, and I have lived in this area for 30 years, but until last summer, I had never seen the Rose Garden in Central Park. It is glorious, and it is not petite by any means. It's bed after bed after bed of roses. So,
And it's fragrant. When you walk toward that garden, you smell the roses, so to speak, and it's just a lovely place.
at the moment, it's a little bleak, but keep that in mind that if you are in Schenectady in the summertime, just make a little detour over to Central Park. It's well worth the
And
stop.
it's actually it's
breathtaking.
It's a bargain if anybody's looking to get married. I can't remember the fee that the city charges, but it's very reasonable, and there are many weddings and picture things like that there during the summer. It's a great
A
place.
good friend of mine's grandson got married there last summer. And then on February 1st at 7 p.m. at Proctor's, this will be our last pre-show spoken word program this year. Scottish stories told by Margaret French before the pipes and drums of the Black Watch 3rd Battalion. So we have these free spoken word programs to give people a sampling of what storytelling is about, because most people don't know what storytelling is about for adults. And we theme it to what's going on at the main theater. So a half an hour of stories at 7 p.m., whether or not you're going to that show.
That's right.
It's well worth the trip down to Schenectady to see that. And then that Sunday, February 3rd, we will have our next word plays. The topic this month will be From Heartbreak to Rapture, getting you ready for Valentine's Day. 8 fine storytellers, Janet Clark, Carol Conley, Joe Doolittle, Margaret French, Barney Gillard, Bonnie Mayan of the Parachute fame, or Parachute not opening fame, Eliud, and Nancy Marie Payne, most of whom we've had on this show.
I think.
It's at 2 p.m. right after the Green Market, so you could spend a good portion of your day eating at the Green Market, buying supplies, going to hear, and you'll be home in plenty of time for the Super Bowl, in case you're interested in that.
Well, and I gotta say that if the Green Market has grown If you haven't been to the Schenectady Green Market, it's downstairs underneath the Proctor's. It's on the main entrance level of Proctor's, and in the new Key Hall, they've got like a food court set up of restaurants who come in and do all sorts of wonderful things for you. And
they could pay for the smells.
I was going to say,
Charge.
I got an aroma fix when I was there on Sunday. It really was great.
Okay. And the last event I've listed is happening on March 3rd. Again, because our program is shown at different times in different places, this might be the only time you get to hear about our March 3rd program. Again, at Proctor's, part of Word Plays. The topic then is Unforgettable. Stories of wonder and awe.
Wonderful.
Stories of fools, ghosts, earthbound angels, and miracles told by Siri Allison, Claire Beetlestone, Fran Combs-Berger, Betty Cassidy, Marnie Gillard, Stephen W. Leslie, and Ben Russell, who is another one of our young storytellers in the area.
So at that program, we have a young storyteller who's probably 20, and we have Betty McCanty, who's 90.
No, Betty Cassidy.
Betty Cassidy, oh. Well, Betty Cassidy's not 90. She'll kill me if I say that. Oh.
We have two Bettys in our group who are from Saratoga Springs, and they both have the C's, and so sometimes...
Some of us get them confused.
Well, no, lots of people get them confused. They go, oh, the Betty Storyteller, and it's the other one.
Okay.
So, okay. And then we'd like to mention again that we have over 8 hours of stories worth watching on our YouTube channel. The best way to get to it is storycircle@proctors.org and click on our YouTube navigation button.
And that website of ours, Kate, also has a lot of information and links about storytelling regionally and nationally, particularly some of the monthly meetings of the Guild, where we gather as storytellers to kind of tune ourselves up. And it's an opportunity to listen, or if you want to learn more about storytelling and how you might try on storytelling and even tell a story. We welcome you at our monthly meetings, and they're in February. It's the third Wednesday of the month at 6:30 at Pine Hills Library in Albany.
You were so close.
I was close.
Yeah. In Albany Public Library system, you can only reserve a room a few months ahead of time. And so when Claire Nolan went to do that, there were no rooms at Pine Hill, so we'll be at the main branch.
The main branch.
In February. But
Okay.
everything else...
Same time?
6:15.
6:15.
Go to our website, click on Story Circle, and then click on Meetings.
Now, and the important thing about the meetings, because one of our purposes in doing the show is to encourage you to consider storytelling as an avocation, as something that you would like to perfect in your own life. And one of the first easy steps you can take is coming to the monthly meeting and just listening in or trying it out. And we encourage you to do that.
And you don't necessarily have to even have any ambition to be what we call a platform teller, someone who performs as essentially as a solo performer in a theatrical setting. Grandparents telling stories, mothers, as Eliud grew up with. Also, people in their various professions might be interested in learning more about storytelling. Trial lawyers, what are they doing but telling their clients stories? Right. Anyone in the medical profession need to be able to listen to their clients' stories. There's a wonderful video that just came out from a TEDx conference that you can get to from storynews.org. That's a website that I run for the National Storytelling Network that collects articles in the public press about applications of storytelling. And a friend of mine, Marilyn McPhee from San Diego, did a 15-minute talk recently on the uses of storytelling.
Great.
And yeah, she just did it. So she used some of the research that I had documented on the website for her talk. So of course, I put a copy of her video at the top of that website. So it's just storynews.org. And click to listen to Marilyn McPhee.
Yep. If storytelling was a course or a curriculum, this would be the best Cliff Notes I've ever heard of how it all comes together. So
Yes.
that's good.
Yes.
But enough about kind of the method of storytelling. I think we need another good example.
Yes.
I think so. And Eliud is still here with us, and you're still awake after all that rambling. That pleases us, and it's just nice that you can make it up here, and we do appreciate you traveling up. Wonderful to see you.
Well, I love stories and storytelling, so I'm here.
Do you have another story?
I do.
All right.
The story comes from ancient Israel, and it goes like this. The captain of King Solomon's guard was a man named Benaiah. Benaiah served the king with all his heart, and he took pride in doing everything the king requested. One day, the king overheard Benaiah bragging to his soldiers, "I can accomplish any task the king sets before me. There is nothing impossible for me." Well, this troubled the king because he knew Benaiah to be a quiet man of action. So he thought that Benaiah needed to be humbled. I know what I'll do. I'll give him an impossible task, and then when he comes to me and tells me that he wasn't able to do it, I will tell him that I did it to teach him a lesson. So he called Benaiah to his side and he said, Benaiah, my heart longs for a certain magical ring. The guard bowed low and he smiled broadly and said, sire, your wish is my command. You tell me, describe this ring so that I may set forth and get it for you. Well, King Solomon's eyes twinkled because the ring he wanted did not exist, and he said, I command, in 6 months' time, bring me a magical ring that can make a happy person sad and a sad person happy. Well, Benaiah had never heard of such a wonder, but committing himself to the task, he said, I will search the world if I have to, and I will get you that ring. And immediately he set off for the marketplace. He went to every goldsmith in Jerusalem, but none had ever heard of such a magical ring. The silversmith had never heard of a ring like that either. So he thought that perhaps the ring came from a faraway land. So he went to meet the caravans that traveled from afar. And he asked, have you ever heard of a magical ring that can make a happy person sad and a sad person happy? None of the traders of precious stones, none of the camel drivers, merchants, no one knew of such a ring. So then Benaiah went to the port where the sea captains from other countries docked their ships, and all the sea captains shook their heads and scratched their beards, but none could help in the quest. Benaiah was distraught. He was heartbroken. Was it possible that for the first time he would have failed the king? He didn't know what to do. He was overcome with sorrow. Time was passing. He met every caravan that traveled through the land. He went to every ship that came in, but there was no hope. It was one day before the ring was due. And he went to the marketplace one more time to search every stall. And on his way out, he saw a poor child sitting by the side of the road with some crude rings and bracelets on a rug. And he thought, I cannot leave any stone unturned. So he said, boy, do you have a magical ring that can make a sad person happy and a happy person sad? The boy looked up and said, I have no such ring. Benaiah's eyes welled with tears. For the first time, he thought he had failed the king. But the boy's grandfather overheard the conversation, and he stepped out of the shadows, and he said, perhaps I have the ring that you're looking for. And the old man took a simple gold band, and he inscribed some words on it and gave it to Benaiah. As soon as Benaiah took that ring, his face lit up with a smile. and all the sorrow and grief and frustration lifted from his body. And he said, indeed, indeed, this is the ring that I wanted. The next day he entered the court of King Solomon. There was a feast in progress, and the king was rejoicing and laughing with all his guests. And he saw Benaiah come in, and he said, I will not let him suffer long. As soon as he admits that he couldn't complete the task, I will tell him that I did it just to test him. Benaiah came in, he bowed, and he presented the king with the ring. As soon as King Solomon gazed upon that ring, the smile left his face. And he looked around at the grandeur and the splendor of his palace, and he realized that someday all this and his life would all be dust. And he realized that the same ring could also bring comfort and hope to somebody who had some kind of grief or misfortune. Because you see, the ring was inscribed with the Hebrew letters Gimel, Sayin, and Yud, and stood for the same, Gam Zeh Ya'avor, this too shall pass. And King Solomon realized that, yes, indeed, he had the magical ring he had requested. And he took Benaiah in his arms, and he asked for forgiveness. And he took his ruby ring, gave it to his guard, and in its place, he put that simple gold band with that powerful saying, this too shall pass. And it is said that King Solomon wore that for the rest of his life because it offered him wisdom and balance. Gam Zeh Ya'avor, this too shall pass.
Wow.
Very nice.
Very well done. Very well done. Very well done.
I'm trying to figure out if you have a focus in your storytelling work, or you just find all these wonderful stories and they speak to you and you want to share them, or?
Exactly. I find stories that speak to me, and it just has a special meaning. And it's because when I was teaching in the Bronx, and there was this elderly Jewish lady she was a school aide, and no matter what was happening, she would always look at me and say, "This too shall pass."
This too shall pass.
And when I saw the story, I said, "Yeah."
Well,
That's what she was referring to.
That's what she is.
As the kids were bouncing off the
Yeah,
wall,
right,
and the paint hit the floor.
did you say it in English or Yiddish?
Yeah. No, she said it in English,
Okay.
but I guess in Hebrew it's Gam Zeh Ya'avor.
And how did you learn to say that in Hebrew?
Well, actually, I read the story, but then I found a pronunciation program on the internet, that I can listen to it. So I wanted to say the letters almost right and the same, but hopefully I'm doing it justice.
Seems good to me.
Pretty good for a goyim, No, it's just it's fascinating that there's the biblical references, and then there's all these stories of the tradition that are
The midrash.
The midrash, right?
That's the right
and
term.
that's the right term. And as a teaching element, it's a very powerful story.
Nice.
Even when you're over 60, I mean, I find that it's got echoes.
Right.
And stories should echo, right?
And that version has that lovely twist of Solomon thinks there is no answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yet Solomon is known as being wise. And yet he finds something that he needed but didn't even know to look for.
Exactly, yes.
And then he internalized it as kind of the thing he lived with as a way of keeping balance in his life.
Yeah,
So that
yeah.
there are a lot of dimensions to good stories, and that one was certainly multifaceted.
And And I'm keeping track of the time only because I cut the stories out. And it finally occurred to me, if I wrote down about when in the program it was, it would be easier for me to find them when I get the DVD from our producer, Greg. And so it's about 7 minutes long. You know, who would have thought 7 minutes was enough to contain that much wisdom? And it's definitely a story that was entertaining in the moment and gives a memory worth having. That's one definition of a good story.
And you know you have the probably have other memories of people who have used the phrase, and so that you know I can remember my mother using the phrase as I heard the story that, wow, you know I've heard that before, and because it's one of those approaches to life that we develop, and I'm sitting here. One of my other volunteer activities is I do some chaplain work, volunteer work, over at Albany Med. So I'm coming off of a night on call, and you know the nature of life is so very real, and there you are, and you experience it in the surgical ICU on one hand, and the labor room on another hand, in the joy of the people in the caring professions doing these incredible things they do. So I went many different places during that story, and I want to thank you for that, because it's a good thing to do. It's a good thing to listen to stories.
And so, do you have a title for that?
That is, the title is This Too Shall Pass.
Oh.
This too shall pass.
Well, that kind of gives it away.
It kind of gives it away. That's why I didn't say
Solomon's
the title in the beginning.
Right.
We wanna,
A Story of King Solomon. How about that? I put that on when I put it on YouTube. A story about King Solomon. Okay. So we have about 7 minutes left
well, I'm just wondering one or two things. Do you have stories that have come from your connection with Puerto Rico as a family?
Well, the first story that I ever wrote was a story about Koki. And Koki is a tree frog from Puerto Rico that people thought only lived in Puerto Rico, only survived in Puerto Rico. And they call it Koki because of the sound it makes. And it's actually more like a whistle. It's more like if I can whistle. But it sounds like Koki. And people in Puerto Rico love it. But it turns out that a lot of Puerto Ricans live in Hawaii as well. And they have brought the Koki with their plants to Hawaii. Puerto Ricans love them, Hawaiians not so much. So they actually burn the fields trying to get rid of Koki.
Oh, wow.
So that's so my first story was about Koki, which Puerto Rico. So I call it the Legend of Koki, and I wrote it as a teaching tool for my ESL students. So.
Good. Because it's your ethnic background is so rich that to weave that into the gathering of stories you tell, it just would be a natural. So I'm pleased that you've done that. That'd be fun.
And the Hawaiians don't like that.
They don't like too noisy for them. So,
Too nice.
yeah, people can research and they can see the Koki in Hawaii and all the problems the Hawaiians think they're having, but Puerto Ricans, hey, they love them.
I visited there once, and there was some pest they wanted to get rid of, and I think they imported mongooses. They imported something which got rid of the first pest, but the second pest, that predator was even worse.
I think that they brought in the mongoose to get rid of snakes that had been brought in, and then they had to take on the mongoose. And they found out that the mongoose was a pretty tough thing to take on.
Well, actually, that happened in Puerto Rico as well.
Really?
They brought in the mongoose to get rid of snakes, and now the mongoose lives in Puerto Rico, and it's kind of a nuisance. It destroys crops and things, and
Yeah, so I know they were very produce-wise, they were very strict. I remember my husband gobbling down I think we had 2 oranges that they wouldn't even let us fly from one island to the other with any citrus.
Yeah.
It just in case there was any illness in the produce. And we didn't know that, and my husband wasn't going to throw away the food, and so we waited while he ate and went on. But perhaps they've learned that importing things, fooling Mother Nature, et cetera, that's it's tricky. It's real tricky.
Well, the other element that I'm struck with as method is the historical figure of Solomon, and we don't know much really about Solomon other than what the Bible and the Midrash tells us, which is probably more fable and story than fact. But when you put a story in the character of a historical character, whether it's any person, it's a rich opportunity. In other words, so when you frame a story like that with the wisest king, as opposed to the first king you introduced us to,
Right.
but you add a different dimension to that. And for those of you who are watching, or just to reflect, historical characters, or Kate's done a wonderful job of bringing the story of people who've made a difference in the lives of others, in the history of the world, in the history of aviation, a whole range of things. And to the extent that they're actually based in some accuracy, they're even powerful. And the fact that the greatest, wisest king, one wanted to keep his guard in line and teach him a lesson, and then got caught by the earnest wisdom of a grandfather.
Right.
Somebody very humble, and rather than try to confuse the situation by just saying, "Oh, you did the ring, thanks, I was trying to fool you," this great leader has his own aha moment and goes, "Wow,
Right.
the person that got the lesson out of this one was Solomon."
Right. Yeah.
So how do we learn? How do and again, the residual hook is, holy crow, one of the wisest men that ever lived discovered something, engaged in a ring by a little old man.
Right. Absolutely.
I think it's time now to end. Now, I know you have a poem over there by some poet.
I do.
And would you read that, and then we'll find out who the poet is.
Well, it's about much of what we've been talking about. It's about the gift of story. My gift is my story. My story is my heart. Take it. Plant it in the garden of your memory. Nurture it. Watch it bloom. See its flowers carried by the winds of voices, so that its seeds may scatter to all the corners of the world. My story and your story will be there forever. I wish I knew that poem.
We do. It's Eliud.
It's Eliud.
Next time you'll have to bring some sculpture.
Well, next time you have to bring your reading glasses so you can read your own poem.
Well, thank you very much for joining us for Story by Story, sharing the human experience, both Eliud and our listeners at home.
And we hope to see you at a storytelling program sometime down the road. Thanks for joining us today.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning